Dr. Hyejin Kim is a researcher at Police Science Institute of Korean National Police University of Korea. Prior to joining the Police Science Institute, she served as an assistant professor of criminology at Delta State University in the United States. She conducts research on urban crime problems, evidence-based policing, natural language processing, and machine learning. Her topic is impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on crime in South Korea. Dr. Hyejin, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks for having me. Can you hear me? I'm just testing because I'm the last one. Is there anyone that can hear me?
We can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, let's get started. Thanks for having me to talk about this new world we are living in these days. It's been almost 8 months since we have the very first confirmed case in South Korea. And there is no doubt that this COVID-19 is going to continue to affect us for quite some time. Days, months, years, no one knows. A lot of uncertainties just everywhere. So every aspect of our lives are influenced by these pandemics, and it includes the public safety, police officers, judges, and prosecutors, all these people who keep the wheels of justice turning. So I've been receiving lots of questions about how this pandemic is impacting our justice system. I guess it's partially because I am one of those analysts working within the system. So today, I'd like to give you some answer to the question and try to clear up some of the misconceptions, if possible. Next slide, please. So, the figure on this slide shows the change in the numbers of confirmed cases in South Korea. The coronavirus actually arrived in South Korea on January 20th. And at the beginnings, it seems like the Korean government had the virus completely under control. We kind of maintained the daily new confirmed cases under 10. But 2 months later, we kind of have the highest number of cases tested positive in March, around 1,000 cases. So after isolating these infected patients, supporting the people in the self-quarantine, and even tracing the contacts with those fancy high-tech devices, Korean government actually finally flattened the curve within a month without even closing the businesses. So here is my first research question. Does crime in South Korea change in response to the COVID-19, especially in the last 6 months? Next slide, please. So to find out, I kind of analyzed the police service call data, which is reported from the January to July. So this police service call data contains lots of information, including the timing and the location of the incident, as well as the detailed description on the nature of the incident. Next slide, please. So before I get to the main analysis part, I did some data preps and I took some filtering steps using the natural language processing techniques. And some of those calls, such as the duplicated calls for the same instance, are just dropped so that I can just improve the integrity of the entire data. And at the end, 17.7% cases are removed, and I used the rest of them for the further analysis. Next slide, please. So here is the answer for my first question. If you ask me whether the crime rate changes due to the COVID-19 in South Korea, my short answer to the question is yes, but not as much as expected. So overall, it is down by 3.3% between the January and July 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. Next slide, please. So if you look at this monthly stat of the police calls per service, you can see a slight increase in the first 2 months. 2.9% decrease in January and 2.3% decrease in February. But in March, when we have the highest number of cases tested positive, crime is actually down by 8.8%. It was the biggest number we have so far. And the number of calls keep decreasing compared to the same period of last year. For example, in April, crime is down by 6.5%, and in May, it's down 5.9%, and in June, 2.2%, and in July, 3.0%. But it's just general figures, and it does not necessarily tell us what crimes are down by how much. So I also examined specifically what types of crimes are influenced by the COVID-19 crisis. Next slide, please. So these are the stats about the types of crime that has been affected by the COVID-19. As you can see, traffic crimes such as hit and run, traffic violation, and traffic inconvenience are down. Why? Because there are less vehicles on the road in South Korea. And adolescence-related crimes such as school violence and juvenile delinquencies are also down. Again, why? Because students don't go to school during the pandemic. Some serious felonies such as robbery, violence, sexual violence, fire, and murder are also down. And here is some interesting finding that domestic violence is also down. Because more and more people staying at home and spending time with each others, and add on to that, the financial stresses and the pressure and the psychological anxiety that COVID-19 is causing, I thought that maybe the number of domestic violence would be up, but actually the number is down by 8%. Next slide, please. I also look into if there is any crime that are increased during the pandemic. And as you can see, there are certain types of crime which actually do not require the physical context are up, such as blackmailing and threat. You can also find the significant increase in the number of commercial breaks and enters as an outcome of business being closed in South Korea. And the number of gambling and suicide is also up, and the number of noise and dangerous animals are up. I think it really makes sense because these days it's not like you are allowed to take a trip to other countries. So all you can do is just stuck in your home and making some noise. Or next option that you can take is just take a little walk with your dog around near your place, and then one can easily find the unmuzzled dog on the street. So that's the reason why we have these number of noise and dangerous animals are up in South Korea. So overall, I found a small size of decrease in crime in South Korea. And some of the findings are very interesting for me because I read those articles from the United States, and which shows that they kind of have the serious crimes up, and then minor crimes are down in the United States. But here in South Korea, I guess we have a totally different situation here because all the minor crimes are up and all the serious crimes are down in South Korea. So I guess the further study must be done on this issue to figure out what is really going on in these countries. Next slide, please. So here is my second research question, and I would like to see if there is any new crimes that are kind of reflective of the pandemic era. For example, in April, there was a guy who was making a fuss at a bar. And so 2 officers are dispatched at the scene, and this guy was kind of resisting to be arrested and claimed that he has a COVID-19, and he kind of spit in the face of the officers who made an arrest of him. So it was kind of a shocking incident for the people in Korea. So I was wondering maybe there are some call for service that we didn't see before the COVID-19 crisis began. So what I did is just take a look at the call that the caller actually mentioned the exact word, the coronavirus. The figure on the left upper side shows the counts of calls that are relevant to the COVID-19. Clearly, we have the highest number of the call in March. It's the time we have the highest number of confirmed cases in South Korea. And you can see the numbers are decreasing over time, but you can also see that it kind of maintains a certain level, which means that even the Korean government successfully stopped the virus spreading throughout the country, the people in South Korea actually still worry about this whole situation and keep calling police for some kind of help. Next slide, please. And to examine the contents of the coronavirus-related calls, I did some analysis using the natural language processing techniques. What I did is I kind of pull up the 10 most frequently used words from those calls that I extracted from the dataset. So these are the 10 most frequently used words in those calls. Location tracking, not wearing masks, Shincheonji, public healthcare centers, suspicion, context, confirmed cases, infection, coughing, and daegu. I guess you're not familiar with these two terms, Shincheonji and daegu. Shincheonji is a name of the religious cult, which actually spread the virus throughout the whole country in March. And then Shincheonji has a lot of church in the Daegu area, and Daegu is the third largest city in South Korea. And then lastly, I did some topic analysis to see what types of issues are dealt with in those calls that I presumably relate to the coronavirus. So topic analysis is a kind of a machine learning technique that kind of organizes a large collection of text data by assigning the category according to each individual text topic. It sounds very complicated, but simply put, what it does is I just made a program that understands the human language, and then this program kind of pull up the main topics from the text that I give it to it. So at the end, all those calls I classified into the four categories. So first type of call is usually made when the businesses are operating when they are supposed to be closed, and the citizen notice it and call the police. The second type of call is usually made to find the location of person who is supposed to be in self-quarantine, but not so much. So this kind of type of call is usually made by the personnel who's working with the Center for Disease and Control. The third type of call is usually made when there is a patient who needs to be transferred to the hospital showing some kind of high fever symptoms. Then last type of call is usually made when the people need the information about the COVID-19 or the COVID-19 test or the location of the test centers. So from these findings, you can clearly see that law enforcement should be prepared to answer or at least respond to those requests from the citizen during the pandemic. Oh, I forgot to make the next slide. Anyway, that's the all finding that I made, and thank you for your attention and listening.